Chapter 1. The Calling. In the small and peaceful village of Domremy, nestled along the Meuse River in northeastern France, lived a simple peasant girl named Jeanne. Life was humble and ordinary for Jeanne, filled with chores like helping her parents on the farm, caring for her siblings, and attending church. One warm summer day, while Jeanne was out in the fields, she noticed something unusual. There was a shimmering light emerging from the direction of the church. Startled yet intrigued, she approached it. As she drew closer, the light became brighter, and slowly it began to take form. Much to her disbelief, she saw figures appearing from the light, figures she instantly recognized from the stories she'd heard in church. They were Street Michael, the protector of the kingdom of heaven, and Street Catherine and Street Margaret, two pious figures who stood as examples of virtue and faith. They looked just as Jeanne had imagined, ethereal, radiant, and brimming with kindness. Their voices, filled with solemn urgency, rang clear and resonant in her mind. Jeanne listened, awestruck and trembling. They spoke to her of a divine mission, one that was far beyond her humble life in Domremy. They told her she was chosen to drive the English from French lands and to ensure the Dauphin Charles was crowned King of France. They gave her a purpose greater than she had ever dreamed of, a purpose that would forever change the course of her life. It was hard for Jeanne to comprehend what was happening. She was frightened, but also felt a deep sense of honour and responsibility. These visions from the saints became her secret, one she guarded carefully, but that would lead her to the extraordinary path that lay ahead. This first vision marked the beginning of a profound change in Jeanne's life. The humble maiden from Domremy was about to embark on an incredible journey, driven by a divine calling that was as powerful as it was unimaginable. She knew that her life would never be the same again, as she was now a chosen one, a messenger from heaven, a beacon of hope for her people. Following her first divine vision, Jeanne faced a daunting task. She was just a simple peasant girl, not a seasoned soldier or a persuasive diplomat. Yet she was entrusted with a mission of immense significance, to expel the English from France and secure the crown for the Dauphin. Before she could set off on her mission, however, she had a challenge to overcome right at home. Jeanne decided to confide in her parents first. Her father, Jacques d'Arc, was a hard-working farmer, deeply religious, but also practical. Her mother, Isabelle Romée, was a pious woman, instilling in her children a strong sense of faith. One evening, after the day's work, Jeanne gathered her courage and told her parents about her vision. The revelation was met with disbelief. Her father laughed it off as a figment of the girl's wild imagination, while her mother, although more understanding, was concerned for Jeanne. They worried that their daughter was not well, or was being deceived by evil spirits. It was a hard blow for Jeanne, but she did not waver. She knew what she had seen, and more importantly, she knew what she was meant to do. Undeterred, Jeanne decided to take her mission to the village priest. Surely, a man of faith would understand her visions better. The priest, a kind but cautious man, listened to her story with interest, but was equally sceptical. He reminded Jeanne that she was a young girl, not a warrior, and advised her to focus on her duties at home. Again, Jeanne was disheartened, but not defeated. The disbelief of those closest to her only made her more determined. She prayed fervently and kept her faith. The saints who had visited her had chosen her for a reason. They saw something in her that others didn't, a potential for greatness, a strength unbeknownst to her. She continued with her chores, her life in Domremy, all the while nurturing the divine seed sown in her heart. The more the people around her doubted, the more she found resolve within herself. Jean realized that the hardest battle was not fighting the English, but convincing her own people of her divine calling. In the face of skepticism and discouragement, Jean stood firm. She was indeed an unlikely messenger, but sometimes the most unlikely individuals are the ones chosen for the greatest tasks. Jean knew that she had a long and challenging journey ahead. The struggles at her home and her village were just the beginning, but she was ready to face whatever came her way. For she had faith, not only in the saints who guided her, but also in herself. She was, after all, the chosen one, the unlikely messenger. Despite the skepticism from her family and village priest, Jean was undeterred. The voices of the saints were clear, and their mission for her unmistakable. She knew what she had to do next. Seek the support of Robert de Baudricourt, the commander of the royal garrison at Vaucouleurs, a town some distance from Domremy. It was an audacious plan. Jean, a simple farm girl, intended to meet a high-ranking officer and persuade him to help her reach the Dauphin. She didn't have the status, the connections, or the means for such an endeavour, but she had unwavering faith and a determined spirit. The journey to Vaucouleurs was not an easy one. It was winter, and the roads were treacherous, filled with snow and ice. Jean, accompanied by a relative, embarked on this journey on foot, braving the cold weather and harsh conditions. Each step she took was a step of faith, a step closer to fulfilling her divine mission. After days of travel, they finally reached Vaucouleurs. Tired and cold, they sought an audience with Baudricourt. At first, the garrison commander was skeptical. The notion of a teenage girl claiming to be on a divine mission to drive the English out and crown the Dauphin seemed outrageous, if not downright absurd. But there was something about Jean that made him pause. Maybe it was her confidence, her conviction, or the undeniable glow in her eyes when she spoke of her visions and mission. Whatever it was, Baudricourt found himself not entirely dismissing her claims. Yet he asked her to return home, advising her to give up on this dangerous venture. Jean was disheartened, but she did not lose hope. She had faced skepticism before, and she knew how to stand her ground. She returned to Domremy, but only to come back to Vaucouleurs later, even more determined. Jean's persistence eventually paid off. Upon her return, Baudricourt, impressed by her tenacity, and perhaps moved by her faith, decided to grant her an escort to Chinon, where the Dauphin resided. Jean's journey to Vaucouleurs was a test of her resolve and faith. It was a journey that not only took her one step closer to fulfilling her divine mission, but also transformed her from a humble farm girl to a determined figure ready to make her mark in history. She had faced skepticism, rejection, and hardship, but she had not let them deter her. Jean was truly on her way, ready to undertake the great task bestowed upon her by her heavenly visions. Chapter 2. The Uncrowned King. After a long and perilous journey, Jean and her escort finally reached the castle at Chinon. She was about to meet the Dauphin, Charles Viollet, a pivotal moment that could define her mission. The castle, towering and magnificent, seemed a world away from her simple home in Domremy. Yet she entered it with her head held high, ready to speak her truth to the future King of France. The meeting with Charles was not as straightforward as she had hoped. The Dauphin, wary of plots and intrigues, decided to test Jean's claim of divine guidance. He hid among his courtiers, while a stand-in took his place on the throne. However, guided by her visions, Jean walked past the impostor and straight to Charles, kneeling and addressing him as the Dauphin. Charles, surprised by Jean's discernment, decided to hear her out. Jean, in simple but compelling words, recounted her visions and the mission entrusted to her by the saints: to drive out the English and ensure his coronation as the King of France. The idea seemed ludicrous. A young peasant girl leading an army against the English. Yet Jean spoke with such fervour and conviction that Charles couldn't help but be affected. Her words were simple, but they carried an emotional weight that resonated within the echoing walls of the Grand Hall. She was not a noble, not a soldier, and certainly not a seasoned diplomat. What she was, though, was a beacon of hope. In a kingdom beleaguered by war and political strife, she shone with unwavering faith and determination. She spoke of victory, not as an uncertain possibility, but as a forthcoming reality. She painted a future where Charles was king, not just a dauphin, and France was free from English occupation. The dauphin was moved but still doubtful. Jean, however, was not disheartened. She reassured him that she would see him crowned at Reims, a city then under English control. Her unwavering confidence and strong faith were compelling, gradually breaking through the layers of Charles' scepticism. This meeting was not just an encounter between a peasant girl and an uncrowned king. It was a turning point in the history of France. Here, at Chinon, a divine mission was endorsed, and a remarkable alliance was formed, one that would shape the course of the war and the fate of the French monarchy. Against all odds, the simple maiden from Domremy had convinced the Dauphin of her divine mission, taking the first substantial step towards fulfilling it. Having convinced the Dauphin of her divine mission, Jean's journey took yet another challenging turn. Before she could officially undertake her mission, she had to face an ecclesiastical examination. The purpose of this examination was to verify the authenticity of her visions and ensure they were of divine origin, not illusions or deceptions of malevolent spirits. The examination was to be conducted by a panel of learned theologians and clerics in Poitiers, a town not far from Chinon. They were to delve deep into Jean's faith, scrutinize her beliefs, and assess the origins of her visions. For Jean, this examination was daunting but crucial. Her whole mission hinged on the Church's approval. If they doubted her, if they deemed her visions as not divine, her journey could end before it even truly began. When Jean arrived at Poitiers, she was greeted with skepticism. Here was a young peasant girl claiming to be on a divine mission. It was a claim that needed substantial evidence and profound faith to be believed. Jean faced the clerics with a calm determination. She spoke candidly about her visions, her conversation with the saints, and her mission. She answered the clerics' questions with a sincerity and simplicity that was disarming. Her knowledge of scriptures and her unshakable belief in her mission left an impression on the panel. The more they probed, the more they found a young woman of extraordinary faith and conviction. Her humility, her honesty, and her unwavering commitment to her divine calling were compelling. Despite their initial skepticism, the theologians found nothing heretical in Jean's statements. There were no signs of deception or malevolence, only a deep and sincere belief in her divine calling. After weeks of rigorous examination, the ecclesiastical panel declared their approval. They couldn't definitively confirm the divine nature of Jean's visions, but they found nothing that contradicted the teachings of the Church. This was a significant victory for Jean. The Church's approval lent credibility to her mission and cleared the path for her to lead the French army. The test of faith was not just a religious examination. It was a testament to Jean's unwavering belief in her mission and her unshakable faith in the divine. She had overcome yet another obstacle and emerged stronger and more determined. Her journey towards her divine mission continued, endorsed by the very institution she held most dear. With the Dauphin convinced and the Church's approval secured, Jean was ready for the next part of her mission, leading the French army to liberate Orléans, a city under siege by the English. But before she could head to battle, She needed to prepare herself, both physically and spiritually. Though she was driven by divine guidance, Jean understood the necessity of practical skills. As a peasant girl, she had no formal training in warfare or strategy. This had to change if she was to lead an army. The Dauphin provided her with a suit of white armour, a sword, and a horse. For the first time in her life, Jean found herself in the garb of a soldier, the weight of the armour a tangible sign of the heavy responsibility she carried. Under the tutelage of seasoned knights and experienced military men, she began to learn the art of warfare. She trained in horse riding, sword fighting, and military strategy. Every day was a test of strength and perseverance. Her body ached from the grueling sessions, but she refused to give in. The physical pain was a small price to pay for the fulfillment of her divine mission. Jean's preparation was not just physical, but also deeply spiritual. Every day she prayed fervently, seeking guidance and strength from the saints who had chosen her for this mission. She held fast to her faith, letting it be her guiding light in the daunting task that lay ahead. Her intense dedication and determination earned her the respect of the soldiers. The initial skepticism of the men slowly transformed into admiration and trust. Here was a girl, just a teenager, preparing to lead them into battle. Yet there was no fear in her eyes, only an unshakable resolve and an unwavering belief in her divine mission. Her faith was so profound that it began to inspire those around her. As she trained, word spread about the maiden who was to lead the French army. People began to believe that Jean, with her divine guidance, could turn the tide of the war. They saw in her a glimmer of hope, a chance for victory against the English. Jean, once a simple peasant girl, was now a symbol of hope and faith for her people. After weeks of intense preparation, Jean was ready. She donned her armour, lifted her banner, and mounted her horse. She was ready to lead her people into battle, ready to liberate Orleans, and ready to fulfill the mission entrusted to her by the saints. Jean's preparation for battle was a testament to her courage, determination, and unwavering faith. She was no longer just Jean from Domremy. She was now Jeanne d'Arc, the Maiden of Orleans. Chapter 3. The Siege of Orleans. As Jean neared the besieged city of Orleans, her heart pounded in anticipation and resolve. The city was a sombre sight. The once thriving town was now a war-torn, gloomy place under English siege. The towering walls of the city bore the scars of countless battles, and its inhabitants lived in the constant shadow of English cannons. Despite the grim scene, Jean did not falter. She looked upon Orleans, not with fear or apprehension, but with determination and a burning desire to liberate her people. This was the city she was meant to save. This was where her divine mission truly began. Jean's arrival at Orleans was a spectacle to behold. Clad in shining white armour and atop a strong horse, she was a sight of hope and strength. Her banner, fluttering in the wind, bore the image of Jesus Christ and the words Jesus Maria, a symbol of her faith and divine calling. Her presence had an electrifying effect on the French army and the citizens of Orleans. The soldiers, worn and demoralized from the long siege, found a new surge of energy. Here was their saviour, the Maiden of Orleans, ready to lead them to victory. The citizens, who had endured months of fear and uncertainty, found a renewed sense of hope. They thronged the streets to catch a glimpse of Jean. They cheered for her, prayed for her, and some even wept at her sight. In Jean, they saw not just a young girl, but a divine messenger sent to deliver them from their plight. Jean, deeply moved by the outpouring of faith and hope, addressed the people and the soldiers. She spoke not of fear or doubt, but of victory and freedom. She assured them that the siege would soon be over and Orleans would be free. Her words, simple yet powerful, echoed through the city, igniting a flame of courage and determination in the hearts of its people. Jean's arrival at Orléans marked a turning point in the 100 Years' War. It was a beacon of hope for the French, a sign that victory was within their reach. The morale of the French army and the citizens of Orléans was rejuvenated. With renewed vigour and an unwavering belief in their divine leader, they were ready to fight and reclaim their city. As the sun set on her first day in Orléans, Jeanne knew that the real battle was just beginning. But she was ready. With God on her side and the faith of her people propelling her, Jeanne d'Arc was ready to lift the siege of Orléans. The battle for Orléans began in earnest under Jeanne's guidance. Despite her youth and lack of formal training, Jeanne showed a natural aptitude for leadership and strategy. Her confidence and charisma inspired the French soldiers, who were initially unsure about following a teenage peasant girl into battle. However, Jeanne's faith was unshakable, and her courage was contagious. The initial victories came swiftly. Jeanne, leading the charge, helped the French forces capture the English fortifications surrounding Orléans. Her presence on the battlefield was a driving force for the French army, who fought with renewed vigour and determination. But war is fraught with danger, and Jeanne was not immune. In the heat of battle, an arrow struck her, lodging in her shoulder. The injury was severe, but Jeanne refused to leave the battlefield. Instead, she had the arrow removed right there and continued to lead her troops, displaying a courage that was nothing short of extraordinary. Her perseverance, even in the face of injury, served to motivate the French troops further. They fought with increased determination, their respect and admiration for their young leader growing with each passing moment. Under Jeanne's guidance, the French forces won a series of significant victories. Fort after fort fell, and with each victory, the English grip on Orléans weakened. Jeanne was not just a figurehead. She was a true leader, displaying tactical acumen and an indomitable spirit that pushed her troops to fight beyond their limits. Jeanne's strategies, combined with her unwavering faith, were turning the tide of the war. The English, who had once seemed invincible, were now retreating, unable to withstand the renewed French onslaught. As Jeanne rallied her troops for the final push against the English, there was no doubt in the minds of the French soldiers and the citizens of Orléans that they were witnessing something extraordinary. A young maiden, driven by divine visions, was succeeding where seasoned warriors had failed. She was not just leading them to victory, but also towards a renewed sense of national pride and unity. Jeanne's impact on the siege of Orléans was profound. Her bravery, faith, and leadership were pivotal in turning the tide of the war. She had taken a demoralized army and a besieged city and given them hope. More importantly, she had proven that the English were not unbeatable. Her victories showed that with faith and determination, even the mightiest enemy could be overcome. The day of the final assault arrived with a sense of expectancy hanging in the air. Jeanne, still nursing her shoulder wound, donned her armour and prepared to lead her troops into what would be the decisive battle. The French soldiers, inspired by their young leader, were ready to fight for their city and their freedom. The battle was fierce, with both sides fighting tenaciously. Yet, the French, led by Jeanne, had a resolve that seemed unbreakable. They fought with a determination born out of their faith in Jeanne and her divine mission. Jeanne, despite her injury, was a force to be reckoned with on the battlefield. She rallied her troops, bolstered their spirits, and led them fearlessly against the English forces. Her banner, bearing the names of Jesus and Mary, fluttered high above the battlefield, a beacon of hope amid the chaos and destruction. As the day wore on, the French forces gradually gained the upper hand. The English, overwhelmed by the fierce French resistance, began to retreat. The city of Orleans, which had been under siege for months, was on the brink of liberation. As the last English soldiers fled, a cheer erupted among the French forces. They had done it. They had won. Orleans was free. The victory at Orleans was a turning point in the 100 Years' War. It was the first significant French victory in a long time, and it breathed new life into the French resistance. More importantly, it proved the legitimacy of Jeanne's mission. Her visions, her divine guidance, had led them to victory. The people of Orleans, grateful and awestruck, hailed Jeanne as their saviour. They cheered for her, praised her, and thanked her for her courage and leadership. From that day forward, she would be known as the Maid of Orleans, a title that signified her crucial role in lifting the siege and a testament to her bravery. Jeanne's victory at Orleans was not just a military success, it was a spiritual triumph. It proved that faith, courage, and determination could overcome even the most daunting challenges. It affirmed Jeanne's belief in her divine mission and paved the way for her next task, the crowning of Charles VII, the rightful King of France. The victory at Orleans marked the end of one chapter in Jeanne's mission, but it was just the beginning of her extraordinary journey. With the city liberated and her faith stronger than ever, Jeanne d'Arc, the Maid of Orleans, was ready for the challenges that lay ahead. Chapter 4. Path to Reims. After the victory at Orleans, Jeanne was not content to rest on her laurels. The English were still in control of much of France, and Charles VII had yet to be officially crowned as king. Jeanne knew that to solidify French gains and truly restore Charles' authority, she needed to lead the army to more victories. The Loire Valley, a strategically crucial region still held by the English, was her next target. Jeanne and her troops, filled with newfound confidence and morale after the liberation of Orleans, marched towards the Loire Valley. Their journey was fraught with challenges. The terrain was difficult, the English resistance fierce, and Jeanne was still recuperating from her injury. But these difficulties did nothing to deter Jeanne. Her faith was stronger than ever, and her determination unwavering. The Loire campaign was a series of battles fought against the English and their Burgundian allies. Despite being outnumbered in several encounters, Jeanne's tactical acumen and the French army's high morale resulted in several victories. Each victory was a step closer to her goal, to pave the way for Charles' coronation. Perhaps the most significant victory during this campaign was the Battle of Patay. The English, confident of their superior numbers, expected an easy victory. But Jeanne, with her fearless leadership and bold tactics, turned the tide. The French army defeated the English, securing a critical strategic victory and further weakening the English hold on French territories. The victories in the Loire Valley were not just military achievements. They signified the resurgence of French resistance and hope. The French populace, hearing tales of Jeanne's exploits, began to believe in the possibility of freedom from English rule. Jeanne was not just a military leader. She was a beacon of hope and a symbol of French resilience. These victories were also instrumental in paving the way for Charles' coronation. With the Loire Valley secured, the path to Reims, where French kings were traditionally crowned, was clear. Jeanne's dream of seeing Charles rightfully crowned as the King of France was one step closer to becoming a reality. Jeanne's successful campaigns in the Loire Valley showcased her leadership and strategic brilliance. Despite her youth and lack of formal military training, she managed to outwit experienced English commanders and secure significant victories. Jeanne d'Arc, the Maid of Orleans, was proving to be a formidable adversary against the English and a revered hero for the French. The city of Troyes posed a significant challenge to Jeanne and her army. It was a stronghold of the English and Burgundian forces, and previous attempts by the French to capture it had failed. The city's formidable walls and well-armed defenders made it a daunting task for any attacker. Yet Jeanne knew that to reach Reims, they had to take Troyes. As they approached the city, the odds seemed stacked against them. The French army was exhausted from their previous battles and the long journey. Moreover, they lacked the necessary siege equipment to breach Troyes' imposing walls. Many in the French command recommended bypassing the city, but Jeanne insisted on attacking. She believed in her divine mission and that God would guide them to victory. Jeanne, with her infectious optimism, rallied her troops. She reminded them of their past victories and the importance of their mission. Her faith and determination kindled a new spirit in the French soldiers. They prepared to face the English and Burgundian forces, their morale lifted by their young leader's words. Jeanne led the charge against Troyes, just as she had done in Orleans. The defenders of Troyes put up a fierce resistance, but they were up against more than just an army. They were up against a belief, a burning desire for freedom led by a young maiden who claimed divine guidance. In a miraculous turn of events, after only 4 days of siege, Troyes surrendered. The city, which had withstood previous sieges for months, had fallen to Jeanne and her army. The news of the capture of Troyes spread throughout France, further strengthening French morale and weakening English resolve. The capture of Troyes was nothing short of miraculous. It was a testament to Jeanne's leadership, her faith, and her unwavering determination. Her belief in her divine mission had once again proven stronger than the most formidable of foes. The road to Reims was now open. Jeanne had done what had seemed impossible. She had led the French to victory against superior odds, and in doing so, she brought them one step closer to crowning their rightful king. The young maiden from Domremy, who had seen visions of saints and claimed to be on a divine mission, was paving the path for a new era in French history. With the road to Reims now open, Charles VII and his entourage set out for the historic city. Jeanne rode alongside, her mission nearing completion. The journey was a triumphant procession, with the French people coming out in droves to cheer their Dauphin and the Maid of Orleans. Reims was a city of significant symbolic value, a place where French kings had been traditionally crowned and anointed for centuries. Jeanne had dreamt of this day, the day when Charles would be officially recognized as the King of France. The anticipation was palpable as they approached the city. As they entered Reims, the streets were filled with cheering crowds, their spirits lifted by Jeanne's victories and the prospect of a rightful king. The coronation ceremony was to take place in the Grand Reims Cathedral, a majestic testament to the city's historic significance. On July 17, 1429, the coronation ceremony took place. Charles VII, under the watchful eyes of his subjects and flanked by his nobles, took the oath. As he was crowned king, the cathedral erupted in cheers. At that moment, Charles VII was not just their Dauphin, he was their king, their rightful ruler. Jeanne, standing near Charles during the ceremony, was filled with emotions. She had completed her mission. She had led the French to victories against the English, turned the tide of the 100 Years' War, and seen Charles crowned as king. She, a simple peasant girl, had achieved what many had deemed impossible. As Charles turned to thank her, Jeanne, teary-eyed, knelt and said, "Gentle King, now is accomplished the pleasure of God, who willed that I should raise the siege of Orleans and bring you to this city of Reims to receive your holy coronation, showing that you are the true king, and he to whom the kingdom should belong." The coronation of Charles VII marked the seeming end of Jeanne's mission. She had done what the voices in her visions had told her. She had defied the odds, led an army, and crowned a king. She was no longer just Jeanne d'Arc, the peasant girl from Domremy. She was Jeanne d'Arc, the Maid of Orleans, the woman who had changed the course of history. Chapter 5. The Fall. Flushed with the success of the coronation and buoyed by a sense of divine purpose, Jeanne set her sights on Paris, the jewel in the English crown. Liberating the capital would be a powerful statement, a confirmation of Charles VII's authority over all of France. But Paris was heavily fortified and defended by a determined English force. The task was daunting, but Jeanne was undeterred. Under Jeanne's command, the French army reached the outskirts of Paris in early September 1429. The Parisian fortifications were formidable, a daunting wall between the French forces and their objective. The siege began with Jeanne leading her troops fearlessly against the English defences, just as she had done in her previous campaigns. But the battle for Paris was different. The English defences were stronger, their resolve firmer. Despite their spirited assault, the French forces could not breach the city walls. Jeanne, leading from the front, was struck by a crossbow bolt, a severe wound that forced her to retreat. While Jeanne recuperated from her injury, the siege continued. However, without Jeanne's leadership on the front line, the French army struggled. Days turned into weeks, but the city walls remained impervious. Morale began to wane, and whispers of doubt about Jeanne's divine mission began to circulate. Despite her injury, Jeanne made one final assault on Paris, but to no avail. Paris remained firmly in English hands. The failed siege marked the beginning of Jeanne's downfall. The whispers of doubt grew louder, and for the first time, Jeanne's divine mission was openly questioned. Jeanne's failure to liberate Paris was a significant blow. Not only was it a military setback, but it also had severe political implications. It weakened Charles VII's position and gave his detractors an opportunity to question his reliance on Jeanne. For Jeanne, the failure to liberate Paris was a personal setback. It was the first time her military leadership had not resulted in victory. However, despite this setback, Jeanne did not lose faith in her divine mission. She remained determined to free France from English occupation. But as she would soon find out, the path ahead was fraught with challenges and heartbreak. In the spring of 1430, Jeanne travelled to Compiègne, a city loyal to Charles VII, but besieged by the Burgundians, allies of the English. Jeanne was determined to lift the siege and strengthen the king's position. However, Compiègne would mark a dark chapter in Jeanne's story, her capture. The Burgundians were known for their tactical prowess and staunch resolve. Under the leadership of Philip the Good, they had posed a formidable challenge to the French forces. The stakes were high, and Jeanne knew it. Regardless, she set forth with her troops, ready to face the enemy once more. During a fierce skirmish outside the city walls, Jeanne stayed with the rear guard, ensuring the safe retreat of her troops back into Compiègne as evening fell. This was typical of Jeanne's leadership style. She led from the front and protected her soldiers at all costs. However, as her troops retreated, the city gates were closed prematurely, either due to an error or a misguided attempt to prevent the enemy from entering. Jeanne, along with a handful of her soldiers, was left outside the city walls, vulnerable and outnumbered. Seeing their opportunity, the Burgundians surrounded Jeanne and her remaining soldiers. Despite her valiant efforts, she was outnumbered and overwhelmed. The Burgundians captured Jeanne, a prize more valuable than the city itself. News of Jeanne's capture spread rapidly. Her allies in Compiègne were filled with guilt and regret, while their enemies rejoiced. Jeanne d'Arc, the Maid of Orleans, the beacon of French hope, had fallen into enemy hands. The capture at Compiègne marked the beginning of a tumultuous and tragic period in Jeanne's life. Gone were the victorious battles and the cheering crowds. Ahead lay imprisonment, a hostile trial, and an enemy determined to break her spirit. But even in the face of these challenges, Jean's faith and her belief in her divine mission remained unshaken. Jean's capture was a significant event in the 100 Years' War. She was not merely a prisoner of war, she was a symbol, a figurehead of French resistance against English occupation. For the English and their Burgundian allies, her capture was a substantial political victory. Jean was first taken to the castle of Jean II of Luxembourg, a Burgundian noble, where she was held captive. Her conditions were harsh and far from the dignity she deserved. But Jean, ever the fighter, did not give up hope. She made several daring, albeit unsuccessful, attempts to escape. These attempts, while not leading to her freedom, exemplified her indomitable spirit. Meanwhile, the political wheels behind her capture were turning. The English were keen to get Jean in their custody. They recognized her symbolic value and saw an opportunity to undermine Charles VII's reign. They believed that by discrediting Jean, they could weaken Charles VII's position and strengthen their claim over the French crown. Eventually, Jean II of Luxembourg agreed to sell Jean to the English. For a large sum, Jean was transferred from her Burgundian captors to English custody. The English, in turn, handed her over to the Church for trial. They believed that the Church, with its moral authority, would be the ideal platform to discredit Jean. As a prisoner of war, Jean's life was filled with uncertainty and hardship. However, despite her physical confinement, her spirit remained free. She clung to her faith and her belief in her divine mission, even as she was moved from the Burgundian castle to English custody, and finally into the hands of the Church. Her capture had turned into a complex political situation, with Jean caught in the middle. Little did she know, the greatest challenge of her life was yet to come, a trial that would test her faith, her courage, and her resolve. Chapter 6. Trial of Conscience. In the cold, early months of 1431, Jean found herself in the city of Rouen, the stronghold of English power in France. She was to stand trial for charges of heresy, a situation orchestrated by the English and facilitated by the Church. The trial was overseen by Pierre Coquin, the Bishop of Beauvais, a man known for his pro-English sympathies. His appointment to oversee the trial ensured that the proceedings would be biased against Jean. The charges against her were many and varied, from wearing men's clothing to claiming direct communication with God. The trial proceedings were grueling. Jean, a young woman with no formal education, was questioned by experienced theologians and lawyers who twisted her words and tried to trap her into making statements that could be construed as heresy. They tried to make her deny her visions, her divine mission, and her unwavering faith in God. Despite the hostile environment, Jean held her own. She answered their questions with a surprising wisdom and clarity that left many of her interrogators astounded. She spoke from the heart, affirming her faith in God and her belief in her divine mission. Jean's courage and conviction during the trial were remarkable. She faced her accusers with dignity and defiance, refusing to renounce her beliefs. She defended herself not with legal cunning or theological knowledge, but with the simple truth of her faith. The trial was a farce in the guise of justice. The outcome was predetermined, and the proceedings were merely a formality to legitimize it. Yet, even in these dire circumstances, Jean remained unbroken. She stood tall, facing her accusers with an indomitable spirit and an unwavering faith. Her trial had begun, but her fight was far from over. As the trial progressed, Jean was subjected to relentless interrogations and psychological torture. The men questioning her sought to break her spirit, hoping that she would renounce her claims of divine visions and her mission. Despite the adversarial conditions, Jean remained steadfast. She was interrogated numerous times, often in the presence of several men, but without any female companionship, a breach of the canon law. Her interrogators used all kinds of tactics, including deception and trickery, to try and confuse her or lead her into self-incrimination. They questioned her about her faith, her visions, and her decision to wear men's clothing, a contentious issue and one of the main accusations against her. But Jean, with an inner strength that belied her age and her circumstances, withstood their tactics. She maintained that her visions were real and from God, and that she wore men's clothing as a practicality given her role in the war and for personal safety in prison. Threats of physical torture were also part of the cruel psychological game her interrogators played. They showed her the torture instruments and threatened her with their use, hoping to scare her into submission. Still, Jean remained resolute. She told them that even if they tore her body limb from limb, she would not deny her visions or her mission. Jean's resilience under duress was remarkable. Her courage in the face of her interrogators, her determination to stick to her truth, and her unwavering faith in the face of extreme adversity exemplified her extraordinary character. The ordeal was designed to break her, but instead it only showcased her indomitable spirit and the depth of her faith. As expected, the rigged trial found Jean guilty of heresy. She was accused of cross-dressing, blasphemy, and most significantly, claiming to have spoken directly with God without the mediation of the Church. The verdict was a foregone conclusion, and Jean was sentenced to death by burning at the stake. In the face of this terrifying sentence, Jean initially signed a recantation. This document, likely coerced and written in legalese that Jean would not have understood, stated that she renounced her visions and accepted the Church's authority. She also agreed to wear women's clothing, a gesture symbolic of her submission to the Church. In exchange for her recantation, Jean's sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. But this respite was short-lived. Within days, Jean reclaimed her truth. She declared that her recantation had been a mistake. She stated that her visions were indeed divine, and that she had only recanted out of fear for her life. Jean's reaffirmation of her faith and her visions was a courageous act. It was a testament to her strong character and unshakable belief in her divine mission. But it also sealed her fate. Her accusers used her reversal as proof of her relapsed heresy, a crime punishable by death. Despite the gravity of her situation, Jean met her fate with bravery. She chose to die standing for her beliefs rather than live denying them. Her verdict and recantation marked the end of her trial, but her story was far from over. Jean's legacy would continue to inspire generations to come. Chapter 7. Martyrdom and Legacy. On May 30, 1431, in the bustling old market square of Rouen, a grim spectacle was set to unfold. A large pyre had been constructed, with a tall wooden stake at its centre. This was the stage for Jeanne d'Arc's final act, her execution. The crowd gathered early. There were townsfolk, soldiers, clergy, and even some nobility. The atmosphere was tense, charged with the mix of morbid curiosity and sombre reflection that such an event inevitably brings. At the centre of it all was Jeanne, a young woman barely out of her teens who had inspired a nation and threatened an empire. Jeanne was led to the stake dressed in a simple white garment, her hands bound, and her expression resolute. Despite her impending doom, she held her head high, displaying a sense of courage and dignity that touched even the stoniest hearts in the crowd. As she was tied to the stake, a sympathetic English soldier handed her a small, crudely fashioned cross, which she clung to in her final moments. With the crowd watching in silence, the executioner set the pyre alight. The flames grew, slowly at first, then quickly rising to engulf the figure at the stake. Jean's voice echoed across the square, not with cries of pain, but with fervent prayers. Her last word, witnesses would later report, was a loud cry of Jesus. The execution was designed to be a demonstration of power, a warning to those who dared defy the English and the Church. However, it didn't have the intended effect. Many in the crowd were moved to tears, struck by Jean's courage and faith. Even some English soldiers were reported to have shown regret, with one supposedly exclaiming, "We are lost. We have burned a saint." Jean's execution at the stake marked the end of her earthly journey, but it was just the beginning of her immortal legacy. Her bravery, faith, and commitment to her country, demonstrated with her last breath, left an indelible mark on the hearts of those who witnessed her death and would inspire millions in the centuries to come. Jean's death was not the end of her story. Instead, it served to catalyze a process of change and reconsideration that eventually led to her redemption in the eyes of the Church. 24 years after her execution, under the directive of Pope Calixtus III, a posthumous retrial, known as the Trial of Rehabilitation, began in 1455. The trial was initiated at the behest of Jean's mother, Isabelle Romay, and her brothers, who sought to clear Jean's name. The primary aim of this retrial was to investigate the fairness and legality of the original trial and Jean's verdict. Unlike the initial trial, this one was conducted with a genuine pursuit of truth. Witnesses from Jean's life, including those who had known her as a child in Domremy, soldiers who had fought alongside her, and even some of the clerics involved in her original trial, were called to testify. The court thoroughly reviewed the proceedings of the first trial, re-examining its irregularities and biased handling. Through the course of this retrial, the narrative of Jean's life was revisited, this time with empathy and an open mind. Her visions were viewed not as heresy, but as mystical experiences. Her wearing of male attire, previously viewed as an act of defiance, was understood to be an act of practicality and self-protection. In 1456, after an exhaustive re-evaluation, the court declared Jean innocent of the charges that had led to her execution. They found that the original trial had been tainted by bias, political motivation, and breaches of canonical law. The verdict against Jean was officially annulled, and her name was cleared, but the greatest rectification was the recognition of her devout faith and loyalty to her country. This posthumous trial represented a form of earthly redemption for Jean. The Church's recognition of the injustice she had faced on their steps to rectify it served to restore her reputation and solidify her standing as a national hero of France and a faithful servant of God. Centuries after her death, Jean's story continued to resonate, turning her into a figure of immense historical significance and spiritual importance. The final act in her journey from a peasant girl to a universally recognized saint took place on May 16, 1920, when Pope Benedict XV declared Jeanne d'Arc a saint of the Catholic Church. Jean's canonization process was itself a testament to her enduring influence. The Church carefully considered her life, her faith, and her deeds before declaring her a model of Catholic virtues. The fact that Jeanne had been initially condemned by a church court and then later canonized underscored her unique path to sainthood. Her transformation into a saint reflected how the perception of Jeanne had evolved over the centuries. Initially regarded as a heretic and a witch, Jeanne was posthumously seen as a brave warrior, a patriotic symbol, and finally, as a holy figure worthy of veneration. Her canonization completed her spiritual journey, providing the ultimate vindication of her faith and her claims of divine guidance. As a saint, Jeanne d'Arc holds a unique place in the collective consciousness of humanity. She is celebrated as a symbol of courage, faith, and patriotism. Her story is taught in schools, depicted in art, literature, and film, inspiring millions around the world. Her legacy endures not just in the annals of history, but in the hearts of those who look to her life for inspiration. Her canonization also played a crucial role in cementing her status as a national symbol of France. Jeanne d'Arc, the peasant girl who helped alter the course of French history, became Saint Jeanne d'Arc, the divine protector of France. Saint Jeanne d'Arc's story serves as a reminder that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things. Her life, filled with faith, courage, and a commitment to her mission, continues to inspire and guide people long after her death. Her legacy is a testament to the enduring power of belief and the indomitable spirit of humanity. Chapter 8. The Maiden of Orleans in Retrospect. With all the stories, the art, the literature, and the reverence that has followed Jeanne d'Arc throughout the centuries, it's easy to forget that at the heart of it all was a young girl named Jeanne. Amidst the battles, visions, trials, and the eventual canonization, we find a person with a character and motivations that were as human as they were extraordinary. Jeanne was born into a peasant family in the small village of Domremy. Her early life was filled with the normalcy and simplicity of rural living, farming, household chores, and attending church. From an early age, she displayed a devout faith and a sense of compassion that were noted by those around her. She was, in essence, a typical girl of her time, but with an extraordinary destiny waiting ahead. Jeanne's life dramatically changed when she began to have visions at the age of 13. The voices she heard from Saints Catherine Margaret and Michael inspired her and filled her with a divine purpose. But at the same time, they isolated her from her peers and put her on a path that few could comprehend, let alone support. Her motivation was rooted in her deep faith and her love for her homeland. Despite the tremendous dangers she faced, she felt compelled to follow the path that her visions laid out for her. It's worth remembering that Jeanne was not a trained warrior, a seasoned diplomat, or a theological scholar. She was a teenager who bravely took on these roles out of necessity and a profound sense of duty. In the face of skepticism and outright hostility, Jeanne remained steadfast. She challenged societal norms, defying the expectations of what a woman, especially a young peasant girl, could do. Jeanne's character shines through in these instances. Her bravery, her unwavering belief in her cause, and her determination to carry out what she saw as her divine mission. Her courage and resilience were not only demonstrated in the heat of battle, but also in the solitude of her prison cell and the harsh scrutiny of her trial. Facing threats, manipulation, and impending death, Jeanne held firm to her beliefs and her truth. In retrospect, while recognizing Jeanne's historical significance and spiritual importance, it's essential to remember the girl behind the legend. The young woman who dared to believe in her divine calling, who fought for her country's freedom, and faced her tragic end with courage and dignity. This understanding paints a fuller picture of Saint Jeanne d'Arc, not only as a national hero and saint, but also as an inspiring and relatable human being. Jeanne d'Arc's impact on history cannot be overstated. Her remarkable achievements during the 100 Years' War and her enduring legacy continue to resonate throughout the centuries. Examining her historical impact allows us to understand the significant role she played in shaping the course of European history. First and foremost, Jeanne's military contributions were unparalleled. She played a pivotal role in turning the tide of the war in favour of the French. Her victories, most notably the lifting of the Siege of Orleans, not only restored French morale, but also weakened English control over French territories. Her strategic brilliance and charismatic leadership inspired the French soldiers, demonstrating the power of a united and motivated army. Jean's accomplishments had broader implications beyond the immediate military context. By securing the coronation of Charles VII, she established his legitimacy as the rightful King of France. This act consolidated the French monarchy and fostered a sense of national unity. Jean's vision for France went beyond military conquests. She aspired to create a united and independent France, free from English control. Moreover, Jean's rise to prominence challenged societal norms and expectations. As a young woman in a patriarchal society, she defied conventional gender roles and shattered barriers. Her actions paved the way for future generations of women to challenge the status quo and pursue their ambitions, be it in military, politics, or other domains traditionally dominated by men. Jean's trial and subsequent canonization also had a profound impact. The trial revealed the complexities of religious authority, political manipulation, and the inherent biases of the time. It highlighted the dangers of religious extremism and the need for justice and fairness in legal proceedings. Jean's posthumous rehabilitation and canonization not only rectified a historical injustice, but also established her as a symbol of faith, courage, and devotion to God. The historical impact of Jean's life extends far beyond her own time. Her story continues to inspire countless individuals and serves as a reminder of the power of conviction, the strength of the human spirit, and the capacity for ordinary individuals to shape the course of history. In retrospect, Jeanne d'Arc's historical impact is multifaceted. She was a military leader, a political figure, a symbol of defiance, and a religious icon. Her contributions during the 100 Years' War, her defiance of societal norms, and her enduring legacy make her an enduring figure in European history. Jeanne's influence extends beyond national borders, touching the hearts and minds of people worldwide, and ensuring that her memory lives on for generations to come. Jeanne d'Arc's captivating story has captured the imagination of artists, writers, and filmmakers throughout history. Her extraordinary life, filled with battles, visions, and martyrdom, has inspired countless interpretations in literature, film, and art, making her an enduring figure in popular culture. In literature, Jeanne has been the subject of numerous works, both fictional and historical. Mark Twain's novel Personal Recollections of Joan of Arc stands out as a notable example. Twain portrayed Jeanne as a courageous and determined figure, emphasizing her devotion to her mission and her unwavering faith. Other authors, such as Friedrich Schiller, George Bernard Shaw, and Vita Sackville-West, have also explored her story, each offering their own unique perspective on her life and legacy. Jeanne's story has also found its way onto the silver screen, with numerous films and adaptations dedicated to her. Carl Theodor Dreyer's 1928 film, The Passion of Joan of Arc, is considered a masterpiece of silent cinema. It depicted Jeanne's trial and execution with haunting intensity, capturing the raw emotion of her story. In more recent years, films like Luc Besson's The Messenger, The Story of Joan of Arc, and Bruno Dumont's Jeanette, The Childhood of Joan of Arc, have explored different facets of her life, appealing to contemporary audiences. Artistic representations of Jeanne d'Arc abound, from classical paintings to contemporary artworks. The famous painting by Jules Bastien Lepage titled Joan of Arc portrays Jeanne in a pensive and solemn pose, capturing the introspection and resolve that defined her character. Other artists, such as Eugene Delacroix and Gustave Dora, have also depicted scenes from Jeanne's life, immortalizing her in paint and canvas. The enduring popularity of Jeanne d'Arc in popular culture can be attributed to the timeless themes and archetypes inherent in her story. She represents the quintessential underdog, an unlikely hero who defies societal expectations and fights for a noble cause. Her unwavering faith, courage, and sacrifice have resonated with audiences throughout the centuries, making her a symbol of inspiration and hope. Jeanne's story transcends time and borders, appealing to people from all walks of life. Her story continues to inspire and fascinate, reminding us of the power of conviction, the strength of the human spirit, and the ability of ordinary individuals to make a lasting impact on the world. In retrospect, Jeanne d'Arc's presence in popular culture attests to her enduring legacy. Through literature, film, and art, her story has been immortalized, ensuring that her spirit lives on and her message reaches new generations. She remains a timeless symbol of courage, faith, and resilience, reminding us that even in the face of overwhelming challenges, one person can make a difference.